Stand up, South Africa. Make sure that South Africa, you are counted with me. Run, South Africa. Stand and make sure that our people understand that the need to bring revolution in South Africa is guaranteed. That under the EFF, this country will be the better. EFF is a tobatengi.
You are not going to grow South African economy if it's not
integrated,
intimately integrated. It must almost be, it can't function without the other economies around us functioning. Let me give you an example. In our manifesto, we say we're going to establish a state housing company, a state roads company, and empirically we think we can create close to 4 million jobs. And then the question becomes, but government doesn't create jobs. And this is why I say it's not true. You need to expect a government department that does not spend its entire time going through tender documents. You know, why do you go to work every day to manage tenders and invoices that are not paid? You need to expect a government. It's true.
So they give tenders, but they don't pay them.
No, they can't pay invoices. Ask anyone in business. What's your biggest problem? I've not been paid.
Yeah, they always complain. 30 days has lapsed. No payment.
When a person in business calls you and you answer their call by mistake and they're your friend, that conversation will end without them saying, I have not been paid.
But now I want us to entertain this. There's this clownish political party that has declared the EFF as enemy number one.
Yeah.
Its leader, John Steenhuisen, alleges or claims that, well, investors will flee the country if the ANC and the EFF form a coalition.
No, let me tell you, you know, we're suffering from, and we must disabuse ourselves.
Sure.
You know what is ABET?
Oh, yes. That
You know
one
what's
that is attended by old people.
Yeah, okay, I can say old because it's adult.
Yeah, it's adult.
Basic education and training.
Yeah.
That guy should have,
I bet.
when Parliament knocks off, he should have used some of the time to go and get some basic, you know. Why would you listen to a person who refused to engage data and knowledge around what investors are thinking?
"30 years of the so-called democracy." What is democracy, in fact, in a country where the economy is ailing, the economy is dysfunctional, as it were? Joblessness is the order of the day.
Well, in the last 30 years, what you have is young people and sometimes old people who wake up in the morning, stay at home, and don't add any value in the economy. It's families that still stays in what we call informal dwellings, it's shacks. It's crime.
Squalor.
It's squalor. It's crime. You have about 25,000 people who get murdered every year.
Yes, sir.
The townships that were designed by the apartheid government are still there. That's the 30 years we're talking about. So to say 30 years of democracy, we are correct to call it so-called democracy. Because at some point there was a political opportunity to change South Africa's course towards greater heights, but it never happened. We're stuck today with a country that seems to look worse than what we hoped for in 1994.
And
That's the 30 years of democracy.
yeah, and it begs the question, then how do we expand our economy using the mineral resources beneath our soil? Because South Africa and Africa as a whole is very much rich. I'm sure you can agree with me.
It's true.
Yeah.
No, we have to use the state. We have the state, we have the political power. The state has to be at the center of reshaping what the kind of economy we're looking for. So if we agree on any kind of economy we're looking for, the state has to be at the center. We have to create jobs. That's a non-negotiable. You cannot have a population where nearly 12 million people don't work. You can't have a situation where you have 10.2 million people between the age of 15 and 24. They are not at school. They are not at education institutions. They're not receiving any form of training. You can't. So we have to use the state lever, state power, state institution, building state capacity, leverage on that and create jobs. You will see that once you match those two things, naturally the economy will grow. And then later on, we can talk about the role of other sectors, including the private sector, which has a role, but on an economy that has proper foundation, proper infrastructure, and a society where people wake up and go to work. That's where we need to start. The state at the center of economic development, building state capacity, creating jobs. And then you will see all other things will come after that. Not a situation where we are forced to pull back the state at a corner of regulation, but we are not playing a far much greater role. 30 years, that's what we have not been doing. Going forward, that's what needs to happen.
One of the thorniest issues, illicit money flows or financial flows, if you like, and tax avoidance as well. I mean, the sitting state president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is allegedly engaged in money laundering and allegations of racketeering, if you like, which includes illicit money flows. This is a serious setback. But how does that affect our economy and ordinary South Africans?
So one thing that we have to appreciate about what we call illicit financial flow, tax avoidance and base erosion, essentially you are dealing with theft. We just call it with a better language.
It's theft.
It's theft. It's theft of mineral resources. It's theft of, in some instances, human resources. It's theft of money that should be coming to the state purse to fund basic education, to fund healthcare, to fund building of roads and eradication of housing backlog. But that money does not come. We are correct as the EFF to say that almost all multinational companies, including those who are listed in the JSE, are involved in some form of tax avoidance, profit shifting, and broadly illicit financial flow. It doesn't matter. You can look at Anglo America, BHP Billiton, Aspen, the company that produce medication. They're all involved. And they call it smart tax. It's not. It's really theft. We have to start calling it theft. You know, because if you look at it at the end of the day, you are taking what does not belong to you. Belongs to the people, but they don't get it.
Absolutely. And that also speaks to this issue of rent manipulation. But we're going to get into the nitty-gritties of that. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. This is the EFF podcast, and I am Titus Tsung. We're coming to you from Winnie Madikizela Mandela House. Today we are joined by the EFF National Researcher Dr. Gumani Tshimomola, who's going to give us the lay of the land when it comes to South African economy. We talk about South African economy in the context of 30 years of democracy. But what is democracy without jobs? So we're going to look at that with much more greater understanding so that we get to understand what needs to be done. Dr. Gumani Tshimomola. Nda, what do you mean?
Nda, ndi machero intators.
Nda, arovuwa man. Ndi musanda or yo mukoni?
No. Musanda is royalty. It's reference to where royalty stays. Musanda.
Musanda.
So when you said I'm going to Musanda, you are going to the royal house.
Okay, sure.
Unless you are referring to state security in South Africa, they have an office called Musanda also, but that's different.
Yeah, you know, pennies, they call each other. I don't know at what point, but they do tend to call each other mukoni. So I thought maybe in Venda as well it applies.
No, there's quite a simple explanation of what is mukoni. So geographically, mukoni simply means north.
Okay.
So it means that you are a person from the north.
From the north.
That's why they call it mukoni. It has nothing to do with tribal lines.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
So if you look at the northwest, it's northwest.
Yes.
You know, so that's where it comes from.
Okay.
So between you and me, because we are from the north,
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks
Doctor.
for inviting me.
So now let's look at the South African economy in the context of 30 years. I call it 30 years of failed democracy, because what is democracy without jobs in a country where crime is high? But let's just get into it. Why has South Africa failed to attain economic emancipation?
No, thanks, Titus. And again, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. So when we look at South African economy, historically, we have to contextualize it, right? So South African economy did not start in 1994 when we negotiated the democracy.
Sure.
So it dates back to even before the formation of what we call South Africa. So the Union of South Africa was formed in 1910. The amalgamation of 4 colonial provinces that came together and formed what they called then the Union of South Africa.
Sure.
So what led to the formation of the Union of South Africa is that the mining companies, initially it was some diamond and gold, they couldn't use the rail network to take the minerals out of the country to the ports.
Sure.
So that railway system was considered retarded, meaning that it was not structured properly. They then say, let's create a union, because the ultimate goal is to get the minerals from the soil, go to the port, and then from there take them to industrialize Europe and the West generally. So that you have to have that historical context. So between, let's say, late 1800, early 1910, 1900, 1910, the formation of what we consider South Africa geographically then gets informed by how do we serve the mining companies best. And these are mining companies that were not contributing to industrialization of the country, although at some point it happened, but for specific reason. These are not mining companies that were saying we're going to build the education system, we're going to create jobs, and we're going to improve the standard of living of South Africans. But all they did is to take minerals and industrialize Europe, So you take that history, you go to the 1940s with a much harsher apartheid laws. By the time we negotiated the democracy of South Africa in the early 90s,
Through CODESA.
Through CODESA, yes. You had a situation where the negotiation was not about the economic ownership. It was not about transfer of wealth to a few minority to majority. The negotiation was reduced to voting and political power at the end. So you have a situation today where you still have a small minority of white people who control majority of the economy. Okay. And then you have the participation of black majority on the other hand in the political space, but that does not influence the economy and how we reshape it. So we end up with something what we call the apartheid spatial planning and economy, meaning that majority of black people continue to serve companies that they don't enjoy the benefits. We still don't enjoy the mineral resources of this country. If you look at young people, it's not like their education system has changed drastically. There's been some improvement in terms of access. But ultimately what you have is the continuation of the apartheid economy. And it's not continuing for the last 30 years. It dates back to the late 1800, early 1900. So we're dealing with a very long period of exclusion of black people from the economy. It's not a small thing that should be reduced to 30 years. The ANC has failed in the last 30 years to do something about this economy, given the political power they had. So with the political power that they've had in the last 30 years, they've had an opportunity to transform the banking sector. They didn't do it. They had an opportunity to create jobs. They didn't do it. They had an opportunity to build state capacity, meaning the state must be at the center of both delivering on basic social services, your education, health, social infrastructure, sanitation. But they also had an opportunity to drive the economy, to say this is where in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we want the economy to be. We should be manufacturing these things. We should be leading the continent in these products. But also we should be in the world, we should be dominant in things that we have a competitive advantage. For example, we have some majority of the minerals in this country. They had that opportunity, but they didn't use it. So that's the failing part. And it's not the failing of the democracy. It is the democracy which was never there in the first place, because you're correct. What is democracy without jobs? So that's how you can characterize the last 30 years and the economy we have and its performance. And the consequences are obvious for everyone to see, because you can't have 11.8 million people who they want to work, they're looking for jobs, but they can't find it. Not even to say that I'll take any pay. No, they just can't find any employment. You know,
Because the environment is not conducive enough.
there are no jobs. There are simply no jobs. So you can't say I will take half of what someone is earning in the same job. There are simply just no jobs. You know, because if that was the case, we're going to be talking about something completely different. But what is happening now is, and this is where the continuation comes in, Titus. There's something called wage reservation, reservation wage, meaning that, you know, we used to have Bantustans, Transkei, Venda, Kazangu.
Siskai, yeah.
The apartheid government and the colonial apartheid government operated with a mentality that if there's Titus and Gumani and they're both unemployed, and I take Titus and I said I'll give you 10 rand per hour, Titus agree. And then there's Gumani who's waiting to say, I also agree, I can take Titus' job for the same, possibly even less. It means that Titus will be willing to take any wage that they give him when he goes to get that job. So the situation we have now is people who are employed, even with the legislation of national minimum wage. But they know that I can be replaced tomorrow by someone who has been unemployed for the last 3-5 years. So even when they make demands, these are demands which they just make, but deep down they know that there is a large pool of unemployed people who are just readily available waiting to take whatever job comes their way, regardless of the pay. So that mentality, capital is aware of it and they leverage on it. You know, if you go to the what we call trade, according to stats categorization of sectors, you find retail, hotels. People take salaries there not because they want to. The wages that they get there, they take them because they know that just outside the hotel or the restaurant, there's someone willing to come in and take the very same job for far much less. So that continuation from colonial apartheid South Africa to today, it's what characterizes the economy that we have in the main. You know, and it's worse because it's happening at a time when we're not producing any goods. So we're just benefiting from last few industries that were there post 1994. We have hardly built any new industries, but it's mostly government and social services. It's mostly retail, you know, things that are service based. And they don't have that higher premium on the value chain of the economy. You know, so that's the situation.
So in a nutshell, you are saying that the colonial legacy of apartheid is the one that we're bearing the brunt of, in fact, the apartheid legacy, and the ANC as a ruling party has failed to, in fact, redress or undo the injustices of the past, because fast forward to today, 30 years later, we still have people who are unemployed because of the economic conditions which are not enabling or which are not conducive for employment. But then how do we go about redressing this predicament?
No, absolutely. But Tatas, you know, when we talk about the ANC failing to redress, we have to be very careful. I'm one of the people who argue that the ANC never had the intentions of redress. Because let's take, for example, land. You can't initiate any redress programs without starting with land. There's no historical records that in the past 30 years, the ANC has attempted to give black people the land. So when we say redress, we need to be very careful. What they've done, we
trusted the wrong people.
That's absolutely. So what they've done is they've been in government for 30 years. They've adopted certain policies which is not even of their knowledge. It's one of the things that I argue in my research. You know, it's almost like finding ready-made policies, and you are convinced that they may achieve some of what you want, but broadly you know that these are not going to help you, and they still agree to it. You know, with some notion that they will start here and then later on they'll be able to advance other courses, including transformation. But we have to now move forward. We have to speak about how do we talk about redress. So we don't talk about redress and transformation. You know, when you talk about transformation, if you think of BEE, for example. So when you talk about BEE, it means there's a company that is owned by, let's say, Johan. Yeah, there's a company.
Rupert.
Yeah. Let's say your hand. Let's just say your hand. And then your hand says, of my company, I'm willing to invite B stakeholders to make them shareholders. And I'll give them some percentage. They go and borrow money from the bank, and then they come back and become shareholders. They buy shares from your hand. Then they become shareholders. That's the idea of transformation. We have to talk about transfer of wealth. That's a different conversation. So when you look at the EFF manifesto, when you look at the expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution in use, fundamentally that's transfer of wealth. The intention is not to transform your hand's farm and get a portion of it. The underlying principle is that black people should have land of their own, and that land should benefit them. That's the first thing. If you say, let's nationalize the strategic sectors of the economy, banks, mines, you are saying there are certain sectors of the economy that should be of equal benefit for all of us. So we should all enjoy that with minerals. We should all enjoy that there are telecommunication lines that runs from Musina all the way to Cape Town. There are transmission lines that have electricity from Eskom. So those sectors can't be owned by a person whose entire existence in the economy is to make profit. Right? So underlying that principle is a transfer of ownership at a broad level. When you say we must build state and government internal capacity and abolish tenders, there's no transformation there of the state. You are talking about repurposing the entire state to drive an agenda of transferring wealth from minority to majority. So the EFF cardinal pillars, all of them, including supplementary cardinal pillars, when you read them in detail and you pay attention to them, and they're interlinked, right?
Yes.
You answer one, you get a solution,
Yes.
and some concerns on the second one, like that. Someone will say to you, but where are we going to get the skills for nationalizing these sectors?
Yeah.
I can tell you now, if you expand the education sector, you make it free, you make it education that is of quality, you won't be concerned about skills because everyone will have a choice to go and pursue an academic route of their choice, right? So, and then you have resolved the question of skills now. And then you say, but there's corruption. I mean, you go to cardinal pillar number 7, talks about corruption. So these cardinal pillars, the first 7 that are fundamental, they are not individual, they're interconnected. So the EFF is what the EFF has done. It is through if you understand where the EFF coming from, the question of what is to be done was asked, and it was not answered by one person. It was not answered by a group of friends. It was answered through consultative process where people shared their view and aspirations, obviously acknowledging historical contribution by those who came before us. But you get to see a picture where there's no one who talks about transformation. The question is of transfer of wealth and to majority. You don't even have to say to black people, but essentially once you say majority in the South African case, you're talking about black people. They stand to benefit the most. So we have to appreciate the essence of the cardinal pillars, understand the historical context of the economy I gave you, and then start saying, with a state at the center of the economy, meaning a state that has capacity to give instruction, development instruction. We say we want to generate 5,000 additional generation capacity.
So the current state doesn't have capacity to do such.
No, I'm not accusing them of it.
It's reality.
At some point, the former Minister of Trade and Industry, Rob Davis, he went on and even wrote a whole book about it. Right? I'm not going to mention the title here because I was not sent to advertise, but I want to make a point. He was a Minister of Trade and Industry for quite a while. The current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, he says, and once he speaks, just know that the entire collective of the ANC think like that. He says, we don't have control of the economy. We don't decide what happens in the economy. They even go to a point of begging the private sector to invest money. So they say there's an investment strike. As a result, there are no jobs. They will accuse companies listed in the JSE and the banks, of holding cash, of staying with large sums of money in their bank accounts, asking the question of why are you not investing that money?
Yeah.
A state that has a capacity to issue developmental instruction will never ask you why you're sitting with 1 billion in your bank account. We'll just tell you we're going to build a road from here to there. We'll put a clinic and residential area there.
Absolutely.
There are opportunities in this area for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then you yourself, you'll feel the need to invest it. So a state that has capacity to give directive at a developmental level is one which can, in future, implement all those cardinal pillars of the EFF, starting with the land. When you take the land into the custody of the state on behalf of the people, and you say that you only get the land that you're going to use, and for a purpose which you have indicated, then you can start development.
Yeah.
A state which can then say, we're going to nationalize all the mines. All the mines currently as it stands are nationalized. But what do you do when you nationalize them? We're going to embark on a serious beneficiation process.
Oh, yes, of course.
That kind of a state, it means that it begins to play a far greater role. It start to command. You know, it's not these historical terminologies of command economy. No. We're not dogmatic about it. You know, we're not fixed to an idea which can't be changed by material conditions. You know, so we're able to say this is how we'll guide the entire state going forward in order to be able to implement those cardinal pillars, and they're very clear.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, you pointed out very clear that the current state, even the sitting president, doesn't have capacity because I remember at some point delivering his State of the Nation address, bluntly so, said government does not create jobs. In fact, business create jobs.
It's not true. He said, I mean, I know he said it, you know. And it's not the only one, Titus, who think like that. You know, it's not true that government does not create jobs. You know, government has to be the first line leading the march in the direction of the economy. How are you going to do that if you don't create jobs at the forefront of the economy? Government has to create jobs. When he said that, in fact, he even went further. He said it's not our responsibility as government to create jobs. It's business. He is not different to someone who says the only way to grow the economy is through, the only way to create jobs and grow the economy is through private investment. You are saying the same thing, just differently. Government has to be the one that laid the foundation, solid foundation of jobs. And these jobs are not complicated things. These are basic things. You know that you're going to drink water in a municipality, right? You know you're going to drive past a traffic circle, what we call robots also, traffic lights. You know these things. You know you're going to cut grass on the side of the highway every time it rains or they grow.
Yeah.
Those people who are working on that space, they have to be employed permanently. Meaning that the face of the state is the people who do those things that happen all the time. We call them recurring function, meaning that they recur. You know, their occurrence is permanent. You have to then use that to absorb as many people as possible into employment. Let me give you an example. In our manifesto, we say we're going to establish a state housing company, a state roads company. And empirically, we think we can create close to 4 million jobs. And then the question becomes, but government doesn't create jobs. And this is why I say it's not true. If you look at the housing situation in South Africa currently, we're stuck with the apartheid spatial planning, right? People in Alexander, people in Nyanga, if you go to Mdantsane, in East London, and all other townships, Umlazi, Khayelitsha, people don't have houses. So according to Stats SA, when you take what they say it's traditional dwelling and informal dwelling, you get a good sense that you may have plus minus 1.9 million people who don't have proper housing. But there's something else called National Housing Needs Register. These are people who go to government and says, I'm Gumani, I need help with a house, right? So those people who says, I need help with a house, it's 2.4 million. These are 2.4 million people who have gone to government and says, I need help with a house. And this 2.4 does not include the 600 you will find in the Western Cape. You know, so effectively you have close to about 3 million people who don't have houses. And by their own acknowledgement, they went to government and says, we need houses. In the Western Cape, it's over 600,000. Other 8 provinces, you're looking at about 2.4 million. A project led by the state to eradicate housing backlog ultimately will provide housing, but at the beginning, when you clear the site, when you clear the land, when you drop plans, when you hire artisan, bricklayers, and all that, that's how you're creating jobs. So that's the role of the state. But you're not going to stop building houses and it's done. You have about 750,000 kilometers of road network in South Africa, the whole country. About 490 of it is gravel.
Gravel, yeah.
You know, when they categorize a gravel road, for it to qualify to form part of the road network, it means that at least average 300 cars must drive past there a day. It's gravel. And you know, I mean, if you think of where you come from, where I come from, I'm in the Eastern Cape now. I was in KZN. You see more gravel road than tar road. I mean, if you take out the 22,000 kilometer that it's maintained by Sanral only, I mean, they want to add it to 35 now, but just think of it. 750,000. Sanral only maintains 22,000 kilometers. Those are the roads where when you're driving on them, it just feels perfect sometimes. Not all the times.
Yeah.
So if you say we are going to eradicate the backlog of 460,000 kilometers of gravel road, we're not only putting tar. Some instances, you just need to pave it.
Pave, yeah.
You know? I mean, the kind of jobs that you can get from that, it's one instant, but in a long term, you are effectively building internal capacity to maintain your roads.
Sure.
You know, once you build something, you know how to maintain it. Already, if you just look at the housing backlog and the road backlog that we have, no private sector is going to come and intervene. But if the state is leading through internal capacity, automatically jobs are going to come.
Sure.
If you look at 4 million from that space, and then you're sitting at 11.8 million, including discouraged workers there in that number, which is over 3 million. You know, people who says, no, I've looked for a job, I can't find it. 4 million, already you're making progress. And that's just one sector. You have not spoken about insourcing of workers in other spaces. You have not spoken about the industrial policy that produce goods.
Yeah.
You know, so just that space.
Sure. So that's how precisely the EFF is going to try and ensure that there's job creation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fighters, we need to create jobs. And to create jobs, you need a very simple strategy. The road infrastructure must be in good condition. The supply of water and electricity must be reliable. There will never be a village here in our Tambo without a shopping mall or shopping complex if there is a proper road. No one wants to invest in an area that is not accessible. You must first make the areas accessible. Those areas are going to flourish. Not only that, you have to build industries. If you don't industrialize and open close factories, you will never create jobs.
Now, you also touched on the issue of transformation. When we look at the financial sector, the private sector entirely, it's a very greedy sector. Very greedy, absolutely greedy, because if you look at the material conditions that ordinary South Africans are grappling with on the ground. I mean, as a layman who goes to a supermarket only to find that the price of bread has skyrocketed, petrol has gone up. In the main, the private sector, the banking institutions seem not to be the hardest hit, because in the main, they're the ones that are gaining or making more profit through inflation. So when we talk about transformation, how do we then transform the private sector, the financial sector, the banking sector, to ensure that there's equality as well in the economy of South Africa?
No, we have to go back to that point I made earlier. This language of transformation, it's not going to help us.
Sure.
Us. We have to talk about transfer of wealth to majority of the people, right? We have to conscientize ourselves that you only transform what someone else has, right? But you can only transfer wealth that no one can argue that it does not belong to the people. There's no one who can argue that land does not belong to the people. Land belongs to all of us. We should enjoy the benefits of the land collectively. Mineral resources. That we have gold, some gold, some gold. Most of it has been mined. That we have gold, platinum, chrome, iron ore, coal. That can generate electricity for us for the next 200 years. You know, that wealth, no one can argue that it belongs to the people. But let's talk about the financial sector.
Sure.
So when we went to Parliament in the first term, this is the 7th term of Parliament.
Yeah, the 6th, winding up to the 7th.
Well, yeah. Okay. When we went, so that means it was the 5th term when we started. The EFF, through 2 committees, the Standing Committee on Finance and Trade and Industry, we pushed there that we talk about this issue of the financial sector. Even in the submissions we made there, we said, we're not talking about transformation. We're talking about transfer, right? So currently the JSC, last time I checked, it's well over 18 trillion in market capitalization. Market capitalization meaning if one company says, I have 1 share and the value of share is 10 rand or 20, let's say 20 rand. If that company, 1 share, 20 rand. If they say we're issuing 1 million shares, that's 20 million. So the market capitalization of the JSC, listed companies, we are looking at nothing less than 18 trillion. And then ask a question, how many black people enjoy that ownership? Very little. In fact, the evidence suggests that in the last 5 years, that number has not been growing. It has been decreasing. And there's contestation of the numbers, and that's why I'm going to stay away from it. But just think of the 18 trillion that it's majority of the people who enjoy it are white people, predominantly in the financial sector. There's an argument that no, but we have something called the Public Investment Corporation. It invests workers' money. These are government employees, and therefore, indirectly, they are shareholders.
Yeah.
It's not true. You are taking their money and says, I'm going to keep it. I'll give it to you when you go on pension, but it will come with some returns above inflation so that we maintain its value. But the immediate beneficiaries of the money that the PIC put in the JSC are people who go and build big companies, CEOs of companies who go and get about 80 million a year. I mean, one CEO of one of these banks got paid 80 million a year, one person. You know, those are the people who enjoy the investment of the PIC in the JSC. Can the PIC be much more strategic? Of course, we can talk about it some other time. You know, but I'm just giving an example that if you look at the ownership in the financial sector, starting with the JSC, go to the banks. You have 5 banks that control more than 80%, both in assets and market share. 5 banks. If you go to the insurance sector, similarly, 80% of 5 insurance companies control the insurance industry. It doesn't end there. If you go to asset management companies, black asset managers have been fighting in that space.
Yeah.
But they control a very small percentage of the entire market share of assets that are being managed in the country. If you remove the PIC, you realize that the sector is predominantly white. We're still trying to transform there. And the unfortunate thing about the financial sector and the patterns of ownership titles is that it controls everything. When you put petrol, that transaction involves the financial sector. When you buy food, it involves the financial sector. Even worse, when you are sick in South Africa today and you go to a medical facility, that mediclinic owned by that other guy, you know,
Sure.
you pay premium for that. You know, there isn't a sector which they don't control. And this is why initially when I started my doctoral thesis, I thought there has to be a full appreciation of what is the role of the national treasury in the economy. Because when you look at the financial sector, whether you get a bond or you don't, they play a role. You may find yourself without the ability to buy a house through a loan because the bank says you can't qualify. And there's nothing you can do about it. So the transformation language of the financial sector has to end. If we are going to deal with a ownership that represent the demographics of South Africa, where black people make up more than 80% of this population, we have to transfer that ownership. We don't have to transform it. And now empirically in the last 30 years, we at least know that the whole idea of transformation won't work. We have to try something different, which is transfer of ownership. So the financial sector, if you look back in the late 80s, the financial sector contribution to the GDP was below 15%, was around 14%.
Yeah.
And then when you check who was dominating at the time, is the manufacturing sector. So you look at 25% contribution to the GDP was coming from manufacturing sector. Practically what that means, Titus, we make t-shirts, we make shoes, we make machinery, diesel machinery for ISCO. We used to make it here. We have factories that smelter iron. It means someone must wake up and go to work. That person has a job. That job has a pension. At that time, the healthcare facilities were still relatively up to standard, although it was exclusively for few people. But you can tell the difference between a clinic that was operating in 1989 and the one operating today. So when you look at those spaces, you appreciate that there's been a transformation of the economy to the detriment of majority of the people. Today,
Which is black.
Today, the financial sector contribute well over 24% to the GDP. And then on the opposite, manufacturing has gone now to 14%. And even that 14%, it includes, when we say we manufacture cars. So if you go to a BMW plant in Pretoria, they say they make BMWs there.
Yeah.
But what they mean is that they get parts from all over the world. And then they assemble it. And then they call that manufacturing. So there's a shipment that comes with parts of cars.
Yeah.
That's not manufacturing. And if we start,
and that's when beneficiation comes in.
If you were manufacturing yourself, that's where beneficiation was going to come in. So you have something called an assembling sector, which is different to manufacturing sector.
Yeah.
You can manufacture a good up until a certain point, and then you just add on things that maybe you don't think if you make them is profitable.
Yeah.
But we don't do that. No one make a car from scratch here. And so this part goes here, we manufacture it, we take this mineral, we burn it like this, we bend it, we process it, then we make this part. No. You open puzzles. We're puzzles makers.
Yeah.
We're putting together a puzzle.
But those are sophisticated stuff. Not even a toothpick. That's worse.
Toothpick. You take wood. You clean it, you chop it into pieces, and then you pack it. We don't do that.
But Jack on. But where are we failing?
So the kind of economy that depend heavily on the JSE, where people are almost like in a casino, gambling on stocks. I'll buy this stock because it's high today. I think it's going to be low tomorrow. Let me sell it. I'll buy a bond because this government need credit. 20 years, I'm guaranteed return of payment of interest. That kind of economy is bound to serve just a few. The kind of economy we have to shift to is the economy which makes those toothpicks you're talking about. How do we make a toothpick? You have an entire forestry plantation there in Sabi, in Mpumalanga. Instead of cutting those trees and putting them in a container at Richards Bay, off to God who knows where, you have to take it to a factory here, give it to someone and says, with this wood, can you make a toothpick? It means now you're starting a process. Yeah. Someone must switch on the machine. Someone must come and make sure that the measurements are correct.
Job creation.
Someone must come and package it. Once you package it and then you must deliver it, you don't only deliver it to yourself.
So there's no political will.
Political will, but also political competence. Political DP talks about, look, these comrades, even if they wanted to us, I don't think they have an idea of where
Sure.
to start. It is correct. You know, even if they wake up one day and there's some level of willingness, do they have the
competence,
understanding
yeah.
and the competence of how to go about it?
And the capacity to execute.
Capacity to execute, you know. So that's why when we talk about industrial policy in South Africa, some people will tell you South Africa does not have an industrial policy. You know, maybe they are not competent to give an industrial policy. You know, outside all other things of selling out and whatnot, maybe they just are not competent to give you what becomes an ideal as a policy which will create jobs for you, which will build an industrial hub, which will revitalize all these industries in Ekurhuleni, in Roslyn, in Pretoria, if you go to Mdantsane, in the Eastern Cape, you know, there are factories that are just standing there empty.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to Shandima, there on the main road, there's only one main road.
Yeah.
Driving from Chakuma,
Sure.
Pundamaria Road.
Yes.
On your right here, if you're going to Kruger, it's factories that they used to make jerseys there and something called double meserize. I don't know if you remember it.
Yes.
T-shirt.
Yeah.
Nice,
But now it has
simple looking.
collapsed.
No, anyone who's doing something there buys in bulk, store there. When there's an advert of a tender, they said, I have this product. You know. So no one says, okay, you need 20 containers. I'm going to set my machines for your specific needs. Then we'll make them. No. So all those factories, they're just redundant. You know. So we need to shift the economy. We need to move away from being the casino of the world to become a factory of the world. Some say, well, there are countries that are doing it better. They cite countries in the East.
Yeah.
They cite countries that are in America. There's now renewed focus of inward industrialization in America. But the reality is that there are things that we have that they don't have. And not only as a continent, as a country, as a continent also. So you can't have an industrial policy in South Africa that is not integrating our economy to the rest of the continent.
Sure.
You know. So it means the questions about what do you produce must be informed by, if I'm producing A, in the DRC, what are they producing? In Nigeria, what are they producing? In Ghana, in Egypt. And then should we not have a coordinated plan which says we're going to change the continent economy? We're no longer going to take our minerals raw, put them on a container, train, they go to the harbor, the nearest harbor. In some instances, it's not even a harbor. It's just a landing strip in the middle of the mine. An aeroplane comes in, a flight comes in, land in a mine, you load minerals, off it goes. You don't even know how many minerals. Can we stop that outward transportation of minerals? Can we have a plan internally where we look at where are we strong as a continent, and then shift the focus from short-term investment that are favored by the financial sector, because they want quick returns. There's no one who's going to go to a casino and says, no, I'm going to gamble today. I'm willing to win next week. They want to win there. When you put a coin on a slot machine, you are hoping that when you say gitch, it's going to give you return immediately.
So
You
in,
know.
in this wide dominated South African economy, where the private sector or the financial sector seems to have more muscles, why though are we having data from Stats SA indicating that the GDP has declined? I think the latest stats showed that between 2022 and 2023, South Africa's GDP per capita has declined. Why is that the case?
So, and this is the point I was getting to. So the financial sector does not invest in physical infrastructure. They don't invest in things that you can touch, look at. That's not their preferred method of making money. Their preferred method of making money is when they buy shares,
And sell.
and those shares must not be high risk. It must not be long term, and the return must be almost guaranteed. I mean, that's the level of greed. You're not even willing to lose anything. You know, we have to think about a situation where outside the financial sector, when you look at the GDP and you say it has not grown, in fact, per capita is declining. In the last 10 years, South Africa's economy annually it has not grown by more than 2% every year,
Yes, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So even when they say that the economy is going to grow, rebounds, it's like they tell you about 0.1%, 1%. That's not growth.
It's not.
That's just mere existence of people taking taxis in the morning, doing something. Other countries are growing at an average of between 3 to 6%, even in the African continent. Those are companies that are building things, manufacturing things. Those are companies that their governments are not sitting on the side begging the private sector to create jobs. Those are countries where, in the absence of private sector, sometimes even with private sector, we
Yeah.
lead, right? So to grow South Africa's economy, and Stats SA is correct, although the unfortunate thing that has happened in the past 10 years is that even the funding of Stats SA has not been adequate. They can tell us some parts of the picture, they can't tell us the full picture.
Yeah.
So you have to look at an economy that starts by acknowledging that our strong points is both minerals and human resource. 10 million young people who are not at school, they are not being trained, they are not in school, they're not in employment. 10 million. That's labor. That's in the next 10 years. Those people will still not have jobs if you don't do anything. So you have two things that will work for you. You have minerals, you have human resource. Thirdly, you have the African continent. There are places where there's no electricity in the African continent. We have to play a role, electrification. For electrification to happen, you need a lot of things. You need wood for poles. There may be new technology now. We don't need wood for poles. You need wires, plastic. Why are we not producing plastic in abundance? So you need to shift the economy so that when you talk about GDP per capita and increasing it, the increase is dependent on an economy that is producing things every day.
Oh.
So it's declining now, not because there are no people who are not making money. You are correct. Earlier on, you mentioned that banks are making profits now. In the last reporting period for the banks, all of them made profits. 80 billion.
Yes.
80 billion. CEOs getting bonuses.
Whilst the poor are becoming the poorest.
Exactly. So your GDP per capita is declining, but at the same time, your levels of inequality are growing up. Because they're going up in such a way that your Gini coefficient is sitting at 0.67.
Yeah.
It's almost closer to 1. And if this situation is not addressed in the next 5-10 years, you might find that South Africa's Gini coefficient is 1, meaning that we are at the other side of inequality, the highest extreme levels of inequality.
Because also there is population growth. And when you look at
Absolutely.
our economy, it's not growing as rapid as it should. Because when I was reading some article that talks about the South African economy growing at around 1%, while the actual population is actually growing between 1.5 to 1.6%. So our economy is not keeping up with the population growth. Surely something needs to give in. And now, as we gravitate towards the elections, I think the only hope for the people is the economic freedom fighters. I think the EFF must really rescue South Africa before there's, in fact, something else that we never saw, unprecedented recession and some skyrocketing levels of unemployment, something that we have never seen. So I think the EFF is the last hope in this.
No, absolutely. Look, we said in one of the elections in the past, our only hope for jobs. Now it doesn't look like the EFF is the only hope. It's coming closer to looking like it's the only option. Whether people appreciate it sooner or not, that's a different question. Because let's look at two sectors that will change South Africa. Let's start with the state. Firstly, the state is a big machinery. You have that advantage at your disposal to use as you see fit to solve your problems. It is not true that the state's job is to create laws, sit on the side. No, no, no.
As a bystander.
No, the state is not a bystander. We have to deliberately build state capacity. There must not be anything that the state can do
Sure.
as long as it does not involve profit. We have to start there, right? Secondly, we have to be deliberate about jobs. Any responsibility of creating jobs has to be government responsibility. We welcome the private sector later on when the foundation is laid.
Yeah.
Thirdly, the financial sector, the mines, telecommunication, transport, the state has to take serious responsibility to use those levers and resources to transfer wealth. Then you can get to a point where people move from the kind of consumption of survival to a level where now in China they call it enjoyment consumption, meaning that no one is worried about bread
Sure.
and butter. It's
Yeah.
about the latest gadget, the latest
Yeah.
technology in a car,
Yeah.
the latest
Which is
TV
created by the young ones, by kids, by the way.
created by kids in some instance. But when you look at the state and how it shapes its policy, it moves the whole society as a collective towards a better living condition. So we have to do that. And then once we're done with the state, you have your state-owned companies functioning properly, maximally, with a clear development mandate. So there must not be a state-owned company that just exists for the sake of it. They don't exist for profit, but they exist because we as a society enjoy the dividends. And ESCOM that give electricity dependable and affordable, it means we enjoy low-cost electricity.
Sure.
A Transnet that can transport goods, not to the harbors, to the rest of the continent.
Sure.
It means that we become now part of the African economy.
Free trade.
Free trade. A DINEL that functions. It means we can be proud about rebuilding our defense capabilities. You can even now start seeing maybe soldiers that walk straight,
Yeah.
disciplined, and know why the military exists.
Yeah.
So once you're done with that part of rebuilding the state capabilities and leveraging all aspects of the states to solve your problems,
Yeah.
problems of jobs,
Sure.
housing backlog, roads backlog,
Yeah.
competitiveness in the market internationally.
Yeah.
Once it becomes cheaper to make things here, you become competitive automatically globally.
Yeah.
You then have to look at the private sector now. If a private sector does not listen to the state, it means they can't form part of the vision.
Because they're arrogant.
The
An approach.
arrogant, the greed, quick returns that benefit only them. You have to start having a private sector which appreciate that, in my space, government plays a role. But there's still room, a big room for private
Yeah.
sector to play even a greater role. But with a solid foundation, with security, with employment, with returns, but also with a society that, that Gini coefficient has to come down below 3. It has to be at 0.1, 0.2. And even to say it has to be there, it's a short term. But ultimately, you should aspire to eradicate inequality, particularly with our colonial history, where it's based on race. When we talk about the Gini coefficient inequality, you're ultimately talking about black people.
Sure.
And we have to be obsessed about it. We have to be unapologetic about it. We must not go around it. So once you get the private sector to appreciate that, you'll then become a society that now has some form of balance.
Sure.
You might even realize yourself as a state that actually there are things that have laid the foundation. Now the private sector must play a greater role, and then they can then go on and maximally seek profit. But it can't be at the expense of development of everyone. It can't be at the expense of keeping townships, long distance commute to work. It can't be at the expense where the minimum wage is below the money you need to buy food to survive for a month.
And those are the struggles for mainly Africans. And in the broader scheme of things, when you, in the context of open border, one Africa, one currency, I think what people need to understand is the fact that we need massive investment that will drive, the development of the African economy.
Yeah.
So when the EFF talks about open border policy, it's not really about creating a situation where everyone must come to South Africa. You spoke about the issues of
it's
trade.
not. Yeah.
So it's also about we're creating some global community in the context of the African continent. So I think people need to understand that this open border policy, One Africa, is not really about bringing the so-called foreigners to suffocate the South African economy. In fact, it will expand the African economy. Sure.
So there's a big distinction, and it's in the funding manifesto. Unfortunately, you won't be able to explain yourself. Doesn't matter how clear you are to people who are not willing to hear you. People. Once I decide I don't want to hear what Titus is going to say, it doesn't matter how beautiful it sounds. It can even be a song. I won't get it. There's a big distinction between immigration, and immigration deals with movement of human beings. So I want to visit Namibia, right? I don't need a visa. I need a passport. And you know why I need a passport? The Namibian authorities need to know who is Gumani.
Identity.
Yeah, who is Gumani? Where are you coming from? What if you get stroke tomorrow and now we need to help you? How do we know where you're from?
Sure.
So immigration deals with movement of people, right? The EFF position is that the movement of Africans in Africa must not be restricted. We're not saying that we must not know why you are going, who are you when you are going to Namibia, right? We must know who are you when you're going to Namibia.
Sure.
If you go to Mauritius, they don't need a visa. They just need to know that your passport is valid. You are Gumani Tshimomola from South Africa. You have given us an address. In the event that something happens, at least we know who are you. That is immigration. So ultimately, we must have an African passport. An African passport means that I should be able to go to Nigeria and identify myself to the Nigerian authorities with ease. Because I have an African passport. Other than the African passport, there must not be any requirements.
Sure.
I must not have certain amount of money, pay certain amount of admin to access that country. No. I'm an African. I should be able to move from here to Tanzania, to Angola, just by an African passport. Like similarly to what the Europeans have. The European Union has a European passport. You move from Germany, France, Switzerland,
But
Portugal.
borders are imposed in Africa.
Exactly.
Why?
So now let's deal with the question of the other issue which people talk about and misconceptualize.
Sure.
You are not going to grow South African economy if it's not
Integrated.
intimately integrated. It must almost be, it can't function without the other economies around us functioning. That's how we must begin to understand it. Right? So you are not only, by the way, opening up the economic borders so that you take your things there. Because that kind of development will lead you to a situation where you dump things there, you don't improve the standard of living of that other countries, then they'll all end up here. So you need to integrate the economy in such a sense that we don't produce the same things, we don't compete amongst each other to the detriment of each other's economy. But equally, it means once we become a bloc economically, we can then be able to negotiate internationally terms of trade.
Sure.
As a unit. Now we can't. Now you can go and negotiate a trade of a product that you make here. Only be told, no, there's someone in Kenya who's giving it to me cheaper. And then it undermines your own manufacturing.
Sure.
But as a continent, if we say economically, let's open it. Just imagine it. Don't look for a physical border where there's a security guy or a soldier
Where
with a gun.
there's a gate without a fence.
The economic border, it's not complex. It's simply a matter of someone produce A, I produce B, we add them up, they become C. And this happens in 3 countries in the continent. And then we take this thing and then we go and sell it to Europe, Asia, South America, North America as a block.
Sure.
You begin to achieve a monumental economic growth, which you can control, including the returns of that. Let's talk about a different kind of economic border, but just to make this point, if you say there must not be a mineral resources that leaves, we all agree as a continent to say we must beneficiate at least 70% of it. You're beginning to shape the economic conditions outside the continent in your own terms. You know, so that kind of border, it's just that unfortunately we've attached the word border to it. So people are quick to think of, it's like you can't say heaven gate and someone does not think about the gate at home.
Sure.
What if the heaven gate is just water flowing and then you just walk past water?
Sure.
But immediately when you say gate,
Yeah.
someone, especially us, we're opening or closing.
Yeah.
You know, the same with border. Once you say border, we're
Border
thinking about
gate.
enclosures. You know,
Border gate.
border gates. You know, that border of there in Maputo.
Yeah.
You know,
Is Lebombo.
Lebombo. You know, or that's the first thing that comes to your mind. But think of it as the integration of a very complex supply chain value, which produce things,
Yeah.
and then you can determine, depending on the value add, who own and get a benefit of what. But in a manner that there's a deliberate intention to grow collectively. Then that kind of understanding of border, it's one that is escaping people,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So even when we put it in a cardinal pillar to say massive industrialization of the African continent, they still don't get it that we're breaking down
Yeah.
the Berlin Conference barriers where
Sure.
where it was
The Berlin
demarcated,
Wall, yeah.
where it was demarcated by white people who sat amongst themselves in Berlin and says Africa must have these borders, you know. So that's those borders. By the way, when they said Africa must have these borders, they were not referring to physical borders. Of course, they will write because there has to be a mine somewhere, there has to be a train, they will write. But they were discussing the economic allocation of which European country get to benefit. Belgium had to benefit from rubber in the Congo, right? That was an economic allocation of Belgium in a sense of border. Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau. Portugal was benefiting not on the drawing of the lines, but they were benefiting on the trades that were happening in those countries. You know, Britain, South Africa, if you think of it, South Africa, Zimbabwe, that was Rhodesia. Britain was benefiting not because their lines.
Sure.
They're benefiting because they used to own the minerals. They were their own minerals because they had demarcated that space to be theirs.
Yeah.
So if there were no minerals, hypothetically speaking, why would they feel the need to demarcate the economy? If they were just people, why would we demarcate and says, this is mine because I don't want anything to do with it, I just want it to be mine?
Yeah.
They would not have done
And
it.
to show that these walls or these borders don't actually work, the Berlin Wall, there were revolts. It eventually fell. It was demolished.
Yeah, they had their own problems.
So,
you know,
you know what I mean? So
you're correct.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make here is that for us to grow our economy, like you've cited, we need this integrated trade. And South Africa is signatory to BRICS. BRICS now seeks to set up its own bank, a central bank, which will be some sort of a counter to the G7, if you like, the Western economies or global economies that are having the grip on the global finances.
Yeah.
What do you make of this move? Obviously, South Africa is part of BRICS, or part of the bloc.
Yeah.
Do you see any meaningful or radical changes that will come with this change or this bank if it comes to fruition?
You know, Titus, one day you must invite me. Okay, I know I'm inviting myself now.
Sure.
It's fun, this thing.
Yeah.
No, but on a serious note, one day you must invite me, or possibly even better. There's in academia, there's a colleague of mine, Professor Lozelushava. So he did a lecture at the State Theatre, you know. And this warrants a far much longer conversation.
Sure. Or a part two, ne?
No. Remember, remember, I said, I know I'm inviting myself, but I think
Sure,
you
part two, that's fine.
it might even be a better place
Sure.
person to deal with the question of how do we reimagine societies? I know you raised the question of the BRICS now, and I'll get to it. But there has to be a conversation about are the kind of changes that are happening what we ourselves are imagining the future to be. You brought the question of the BRICS.
Yeah.
And let's deal with the BRICS. So the BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China,
South Africa.
And now they call it BRICS Plus.
Yes, yeah, of
Right.
course. Yeah.
So there are other
Players as well.
Players as well who have come to the party. The projection is that that collective of the BRICS in the near future is going to have the most population in the entire world. Right? Population, think market. Market, think industries. Industries, think growth and development. So if you take China, India,
Big economies.
and you take not South Africa, Africa, you're plussing billions of people. You're not plussing 60 million people who live here in this thing we call South Africa. No, you're plussing billions of people.
Yeah.
Now, you can't deny the fact that there's growth. It's happening. There's shift of power. You can't deny it.
Yeah.
And this shift of power is happening at a level of military capabilities, at the level of innovation. Already we've spoken about the population size. There's no denying that. So once you accept that the world is changing, and I don't want to use this thing of South-North,
Sure.
I just want to say the world is changing. The people who used to have the power, they are well aware that they're losing the power.
Particularly the West.
The West. It's the West. They're aware that they're losing the power.
Yeah.
Now, the kind of emerging power that must come, and it's already showing itself in the character of the BRICS Plus, is the kind of power that first has to appreciate the collective human development of all those that are part of that power. So it's not China, Russia benefiting, in India benefiting at the expense of South America and Africa. And that appreciation is already there. If you look at China policies, they don't even mince their words. They say where we play part in development, we're developing everything, infrastructure, human development, and whatnot. That's the first thing. The second thing, when you appreciate this emerging power,
Sure.
you have to ask yourself a very important question. Why are we trading in the dollar? I mean, South Africa is selling, let's say for now, minerals to China, chrome. Why do you need a facilitator in the middle who then convert?
Yeah.
You can't tell me it's because of knowledge.
Yeah.
That they're the only ones who know how to convert and bring all the currency into parity.
Yeah.
It's not true.
And that's when the question of de-dollarization comes in.
Exactly. So you have asked two questions now. First, the development of collective human beings in that space. Secondly, why are we trading in dollars? Right? So once you remove, it's not easy, but you can't deny the fact that the future is going that direction. Once you remove America as the mediator, as the conduit, as the facilitator of trade in the world, you then have serious questions you need to ask about new financial institutions that must be created for the benefit of those who are trading together.
Yeah, which will strengthen our currency, our rand.
Well, forget about strengthening a particular currency.
Yeah.
It will mean that trade is happening at a level of balance.
Yeah.
There's no, if you check a dollar now to a rand, for $1,
A rand is always at its weakest.
you get 19. I saw some article, I didn't go into details. I saw it says if the EFF is part of the coalition,
by that one
the
of
dollar to
DA.
the rand, the dollar to the rand, it's going
Yeah.
to be at 25.
Yeah.
You can never have trade in those terms that can lead to growth. No, you are almost always donating your resources,
Yeah.
to the West.
Yeah.
So once you deal with the question of the kind of financial institutions that must emerge, you realize that we don't only need a different kind of central banks. We need central banks that appreciate the emergence of new powers. We don't need traders in the market floor who think that a trade must happen for the benefit of London or New York.
Yeah.
So you will have multiple instruments that are going to come, including the de-dollarization of global trade.
Sure.
And it's already happening. Sometimes it happens because the West itself make foolish decisions, but sometimes it's because there are initiatives in other parts of the world, in Brazil, in Russia, in India, and in China, where they are now beginning to appreciate that why are we stuck with a currency that facilitates our trade, but the premium goes to people who are not making anything. The only way they benefit is because you come voluntarily and use their currency. So the next biggest contestation of the emergence of the BRICS Plus, and repositioning of the global powers and the kind of economies that we're talking about, manufacturing instead of financial sector, is going to have a lot of questions about financial institutions. What kind of national treasury in South Africa do you need to facilitate something that talks to a shift from the West to now BRICS Plus
and maybe the
international market?
Yeah, the fiscal policy. Treasury has got the responsibility as well in terms of the fiscal policies.
Yeah.
But now I want us to entertain this. There's this clownish political party that has declared the EFF as enemy number one. Its leader, John Steenhuisen, alleges or claims that, investors will flee the country if the ANC and the EFF form a coalition.
No, let me tell you, we're suffering from, and we must disabuse ourselves.
Sure.
You know what is ABET?
Oh yes, that
You know
one
what's
that is attended by old people.
Yeah, okay, I can say old because it's adult.
Yeah, it's adult.
Basic education and training. That guy should have,
I bet.
when Parliament knocks off, he should have used some of the time to go and get some basic. Why would you listen to a person who refused to engage data and knowledge around what investors are thinking? Let me tell you. And I'm going to say this, and I've said it before, and you must take it in the spirit of the discussion.
Sure.
Right? Do you know that if the EFF the EFF will have a role to play. When the EFF has a role to play in governance, particularly at a national level, the immediate beneficiaries of that stability, it's going to be private sector. Black people will get jobs. Ultimately, will transfer ownership of the economy to majority of the people. But while we are starting those things, the immediate beneficiaries of this whole emerging coalition or the future where the EFF is in government is private sector. And let me tell you why. They say themselves that they need economic certainty. So if the private sector says they need economic certainty, they must not have the right to go further and say what kind of economic certainty. No, they must just tell us that they need economic certainty. Who has the most comprehensive aspects of economic policy? It's the EFF. The EFF even have more details in terms of the economic policy than the current ruling party. In writing. And our president always say all the time, if you wake up tomorrow and decide you don't like this thing, you can't convene people and say, let's change the 7 canal pillars. You can't. They're
non-negotiable.
They're non-negotiable founding cardinal pillars of this thing. It's what we stand on. What more certainty do you want more than that? We're the most predictable people, by the way. If you think of it, the ANC, you can't tell what they're going to do. We're going to go into disciplinary hearing with the former president. We've changed. We're going to do it virtual. We've changed. We're not going to do it for security reasons. In fact, we're going to do it. They can't even on smallest things. You know, the EFF is the most certain, well-defined economic policy. Number two, if you say let's eradicate backlog of housing, the immediate beneficiaries of that is the private sector.
Sure.
It means your labor, your workers, they have housing. Anyone who has housing, their cost of labor is cheap. If you don't have a house,
Yeah.
you are paying, the governor of the Reserve Bank wake up one day and just increase the
Repo
rate,
rates.
and then he screams there,
Yeah.
protecting the currency, the value of the
Monetary
rand.
policy, blah, blah, blah.
When you were getting paid 15,000 and your bond was 5,000, all of a sudden you wake up after 6 months and your bond is 9,000, but your salary has not increased. Who are you going to complain to? Employer. The immediate person who's going to receive your complaint is not the bank,
Sure.
it's the employer.
That's why the EFF wants to nationalize the Reserve Bank.
We must nationalize the Reserve Bank, and what other options do we have? Because we can't move to a point of discussing what should be the role of the Reserve Bank if it's owned by private individuals. Some of them sitting in Europe, but they own shares there. So we have to think about it and honestly say, only if private sector can acknowledge that they actually stand to be the immediate beneficiaries of an EFF government. If they're honest, but we know they're not honest. If you say we're going to build roads, who's complaining about potholes now? It's the private sector, So by the time black people enjoy land, by the time black people get paid a living wage, a wage where you buy grocery, you're not surviving, everyone has a decent housing, their jobs, people don't stay a distance where they have to travel an hour every day to just go to work. Then by that time, private sector would have been enjoying all these benefits. So that guy who says, no, the investors are running away from South Africa because they are fearing this doomsday coalition. There's no scientific basis of anything that he says.
Yeah.
And that we spend time talking about him, sometimes it concerns me a lot, But we're in this space, so now and again we'll have to reflect on some level of foolishness.
When South Africa, when I'm so when South Africa, in fact, when the EFF takes power on the 29th of May, after the people obviously have voted for the EFF as a vehicle towards economic emancipation, what economic gains should the people of South Africa expect in the next 5 years?
Jobs. You don't even expect it. You are entitled to it. Jobs. We are going to create jobs. We say how, in details. We don't just hypothesize. Recently, if you look at all political parties, all of them says they're going to create 2 million jobs. How do you create 2 million jobs when there are 11 million people unemployed? So we're going to create jobs. We're going to insource government workers. Those people who are now working under contractors who get tenders, exploit them, there's no job security. They're going to be insourced. Cleaners, gardeners, IT specialists, people who look after water treatment plants. We're going to insource. We're going to industrialize. In our job section of the manifesto, we say that part of how we're going to create jobs is building industries. And we even go to the level of demonstrating where we're going to build industries. There are areas where there were industries, now are closed. We're going to revitalize them. Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg, just down the road here in the deep seat. If you go to Gqeberha, formerly known as Port Elizabeth, there are a lot of factories that are now closed. East London. There are many areas where there were factories that are closed. We revitalize them. But we take it further. We need to depopulate these metros. You can have a situation where, regardless of which part of the world, or the country you are in, when you're thinking about a job, Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, PE, it's not normal. We have to build factories in areas where we can also depopulate metros where they're overpopulated. And you can depopulate them, but the reality is that given the rate of population growth, what you are doing essentially is just to provide alternative settlement.
Yeah.
But when you build a new city, you're going to build new jobs. You know, what do you expect after May 29? You need to expect a home affairs that works. You know, you need to expect a government department that does not spend its entire time going through tender documents. You know, why do you go to work every day to manage tenders and invoices that are not paid? You need to expect a government. It's true.
So they give tenders, but they don't pay them.
No, they can't pay invoices. Ask anyone in business. What's your biggest problem? I've not been paid.
Yeah, they always complain. 30 days has lapsed. No payment.
When a person in business calls you and you answer their call by mistake and they're your friend, that conversation will end without them saying, I have not been paid.
Yeah.
You know, so you have a government department that does that all the time. So you need a government department which says, our job is to give people water, right? So you have a technical department that plan the water. You have a technical department that build the water infrastructure.
Yeah.
You have the technical department that maintains it.
Yeah.
You even know the guy who goes and drop chemicals there. He's a government employee. He's not going to change. You're going to drink water for a very long time. You know, that's what people must expect. And underlying all these things is jobs.
Yeah.
You know, but we appreciate that we can't do it without land.
Sure.
You know, we have to revisit that process of amending the Constitution, Section 25, so that we're able to transfer the land, all of it,
Yeah.
Into the custody of the state, so that a democratically elected state can then manage that land on behalf of the people. So it's not the state's land, it's our land.
Yeah.
But who do you entrust?
Yeah.
You trust the state because you elected it democratically to say that you have popular majority vote.
Yeah.
You are government.
Yeah.
As part of you governing us for the term of where you're elected, also manage the land.
Yeah. And I think we should really give it to the EFF. I mean, issues of illicit financial flows, tax avoidance are things that the EFF unearthed in Parliament. I understand you are part of the parliamentary staff members doing your research work, and this is one area where issues of corruption emanate from. We talk about rand manipulation. You talk about the Palapara saga. The sitting president.
Let's call it the thieving Palapara saga.
The thieving Palapara saga.
Yeah, there was
all
theft.
of this.
There was theft. Yeah.
And someone is running for presidency with all this hanging over his head.
Yeah.
This must be bizarre.
You know, Tetas, there's a report called the Bermuda Connection. It was written by an institution it's an NGO basically in Cape Town. And they looked at loan mean at the time when the workers were demanding salary increase. And one of the things they found was that the board of loan mean, which was being chaired by this guy of thieving Parapara, that board says with the management of the company, they can't afford salary increases. And you know why? They were involved in illicit financial flows, profit shifting, taking money from loan mean mine here and claim that they were paying consulting and marketing fees in Bermuda. Bermuda is a tax haven country. So they attract thieves by saying that, you won't pay tax. Just put your money there. Then they make money through your lifestyle because if you put your money somewhere, you'll have a house there. You'll have a boat. You'll take your kids on holiday there and still look at your money if it's still there, you know. So that guy, he has a long history of this thing of thieving and money.
Putting the lives of the marginalized and the poor on the line.
It's
bloodshed.
Killing of mine workers of Marikana. It's not simply just putting their lives in the line. It's killing of mine workers in Marikana. But when we arrived in Parliament, I remember when I arrived in 2015, one of the first things I attended was a committee meeting where DP was at pains to explain, like, you know, ABCD of illicit financial flow. ABCD, like, to members of Parliament.
Who had no clue what that is.
No, they didn't know what he was talking about. You know, it almost turned like a training of some sort where we had to educate each other.
Europe is the biggest beneficiary of illicit financial flows. The highest number of tax havens are found there. Well, you know historically that they benefited through colonialism and barbaric colonialism, where they were taking our natural resources through force. But now Europe is the biggest beneficiary through tax havens. So the biggest tax havens like Luxembourg, like Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Britain and all its territories. So Britain has got some semi-autonomous territories outside of it. The Isle of Man, the Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, and all of those. And then they utilize those specifically to assist the corporations from their home country to avoid taxes, to loot Africa.
But we didn't end there. We went to Davies Tax Committee. It was the committee that dealt with tax issues chaired by Judge Dennis Davis. We went there in July 2018, made a very comprehensive submission. And I mean, you see there now the outcome of some of the reforms in the tax space, that it was based on the submission we made. And let me give you one example. One of the things we recommended at the time was that the Reserve Bank, the financial intelligence sector, the National Treasury, the Hawks, they don't know what each of them are doing. They work in silos. There's no sharing of information. So when you ask the governor of the Reserve Bank, what is the value of illicit financial flows, he doesn't know. When you go to SARS and say there's a problem of illicit financial flows, this is not true.
Yeah.
You know, so we had to start from scratch and propose that there must be a coordinated task force that involves all of them and have a clear coordinated plan to deal with illicit financial flow, particularly focusing on profit shifting and base erosion. Today is there, but they won't say it's one of the recommendations we made.
Yeah.
You know, when they announced it 2-3 years later, it came across as if there's some enlightenment from somewhere.
No, thanks to the EFF. When I'm gonna Dr. Gumani Tshimomola, recorded Mondays.
It was pleasant. This is very nice. I enjoyed myself.
I didn't forget that part too.
No. I was not inviting myself, although it sounded like it. But there may be people who they're doing a lot of scholarly work around the question of are we still thinking about the future in our own
this
terms?
is the platform.
Yeah.
No, so, anyway, recorded with Sangamanda.
No, thanks Titus for the invitation. I hope the ground forces appreciate the input we make through research to the work.
Absolutely.
Of the
No, you can see the comments are flying. Hey. Thank you very much for that insightful conversation. We have really learned a lot, and South Africa now will make an informed decision on the ballot.
No, thank you very much.
On the 29th of May.
Sure. We must go and vote for the EFF.
Yeah. Africa Dzonga namsaba hinkwayo a cancer swinene. Thank you very much for tuning in. That was Dr. Gumani Tshimomola, the EFF National Researcher, giving us a full lowdown on the issues of economy. 30 years of democracy, but very little to celebrate. So we have come to the end of today's show. We are signing out with Ngena Juju. We are sending Juju, the CIC, the Commander-in-Chief, our President, to the Union buildings.
No, definitely.
So we are signing out with Ngena Juju from the EFF Jazz Hour Volume 5 album. So do enjoy, and remember to subscribe to the EFF YouTube channel and continue liking the EFF podcast. They tried to block us, but we are going to continue delivering this high-end content on the EFF podcast. My name is Titus Tungu. Until we meet again, good day.
Students commander Dango we ishumle minyaga Dango we students commander Dango we ishumle minyaga ngena we
Corruption corrupt activities,
power cuts,
money laundering, 51 million rand tender.
Cyril Ramaphosa may have violated the constitution.
How long are we going to complain about the same things?
Joblessness figures hit a record high.
The recent data on unemployment is disappointing.
Too long have we tolerated corruption in jobs and jobs for favors. Vuka, vela, vota. How long are we going to live like this? Existing without the land? Vuka, vela, vota. Why have we normalized complaining about the dark? In the dark. Vuka, vela, vota.
The affected students remain in the hallways and on the grounds of the East.
They promised us free education in 1994. 30 years later, all they've delivered is a corrupt NSFAS and a broken education system. On May 29th, Election Day, vote EFF. Choose jobs, choose land, fight against load shedding. Vuka, vela, vota.
You must be counted, you must be part of history, you must make sure that you are one of the people who are going to deliver economic freedom in our lifetime.
Vote EFF.